We'll be looking at Daniel chapter 6 this morning. We've just read through that passage this morning. And as we look at our life and we reflect about our life, what are you known for? Think about that for just a minute. At work, maybe it's in the schoolyard, maybe it's within the church, maybe it's within your family. What are you known for? And I'm not just talking about the things that people would say at your funeral, because that's only the good stuff, right? I'm talking about if somebody wanted to take you down, what would you be known for, and could they do that? And that's one of the things when we come to the end of Daniel's life, we see something incredible. And it's not that he came out of the lion's den alive. As we looked at last week, the victory that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had was not that they walked out of the fiery furnace alive. The victory that they had was that they were willing to be thrown into the fire faithful. And as we look at this morning, and we also look back at ourselves and we think about our reputation, but also we must ask ourselves, what would you do if doing good cost you? Would you stop doing good? Would you try to do something else? Or would you continue doing it even if you knew it was going to cost you? Now, over the last several weeks, we've been looking at Daniel. In Daniel chapter 1, one of the main things that stands out is that he purposed in his heart. He had conviction as a young man that he would not defile himself. And it determined what he would do and what he would not do. In chapter 2, we saw that he faced the impossible and he went to the Lord in prayer. He sought the Lord. Didn't matter what the outcome looked like. He went to the Lord with dependence. And as I mentioned about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as they stood before Nebuchadnezzar, they said, "Our God is able to deliver us from the fire. But if he doesn't, we still will not bow." He's able, but he may choose not to. But we'll still serve him, even if he does not do it for us. But as we come to chapter 6, we see the final stage of Daniel's life. And you know, I've heard a quote, "The final hour will often overshadow the finest hour." Think about that for a moment. Think about many politicians or leaders or different people, and they have a lot of great victories, finest hours, but it's overshadowed by a scandal, their final hour. Here is Daniel's final hour. You might call it also his finest hour. But it didn't start here. It really started back in chapter 1. But one of the things that we see about Daniel's life is integrity. What is integrity? Integrity, basically, one of the easiest ways to remember is integrity is doing what we ought to, even if it costs you. Doing what you ought to, even if it costs you. You continue doing what is right, even if it's not popular, even if it's going to bring something against you. And that is what we see in Daniel here, especially in chapter 6. But even as you go back through the last several weeks, there is a theme at the very end. Daniel was promoted. Daniel was promoted. His friends were promoted. And you might think, you know what? If life was like that all the time, and I always knew I would get a promotion, I would do that. But here's the thing. They did not live for promotion. They lived by conviction. Here is the thing about living for promotion. It may look like you're doing it for the company. It might look like you're doing it for the church. It might look like you're doing it for others. But ultimately, if you are living for promotion, you are living for self. Think about that. If you're living for promotion, you're actually living for self. And although it may look good from the outside, eventually people will see through that. When you live by conviction, you are living for something bigger than yourself. And over time, that is noticed. And let me ask you, if you were a boss, do you want to promote somebody who is doing things for their own self, or somebody who is willing to sacrifice themselves for something bigger? I don't know about you, but I want somebody who's willing to sacrifice themselves for a cause greater than themselves. Because if somebody is willing to do everything for their own self, for their own promotion, do you know what happens when something gets in their way? They will cut down or do anything against others to protect themselves. But when they see something bigger themselves and they're willing to sacrifice themselves, they will, at the expense of themselves, protect whatever it is. And in the long run, it is noticed. And that is what we see every single time through the tests, through the trials. Each one, they had a conviction bigger than themselves. Here as we come to chapter 6, we've skipped over a couple chapters. There's actually a few more kings that Daniel doesn't even mention in Babylon, from Nebuchadnezzar to Belteshazzar. There's a few others in between. Belteshazzar in chapter 5. He's now the ruling leader in Babylon, and Daniel interprets a writing on the wall for him. Basically, the Medes and the Persians are coming. Daniel's promoted that night, and Belshazzar is killed that night, and Daniel is taken to the next empire. From one empire, from Jerusalem, to an empire of Babylon, to another empire now in Medes Persia. 65 years about has happened from the very first chapter until now. Daniel being about 80 years old, in a new country, under a new king. And it mentions the first couple verses there that Darius, he sets up 120 satraps. Basically, here's 120 leaders. Then over top of those 120 leaders, there's 3 governors. And then there's Darius. So Darius, then he has 3, and Daniel is one of those 3. And under those 3 are the 120, and under those 120, well, that's the kingdom. And so these 3 were the direct ones who answered to Darius. But Darius is considering to bring Daniel above those 3. And that's where in verse 3, it mentions, then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. Now, what happens in the workplace when somebody is looked at being promoted and others think they're better suited for the job? Have you ever had that in a workplace? Have you ever felt that towards somebody else? Has there ever been a time others may have felt it about you? And all of a sudden, what happens when you have promotion, it reveals the hearts of people around. And they want to destroy him. They want to destroy his reputation. In verse 4, it mentions, so the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Not much different than politicians today, right? I mean, if somebody announces they're going to be a politician or they're going to do something great, what does everybody do? They scour for the last decades, from childhood. I mean, sometimes you hear things being pulled out when you were a teenager, and you're like, what did you do when you were a teenager? Right? I think we all have skeletons, right? When we were a child or something in our past. And they wanted to find something against Daniel. Scouring his record. Checking with people of the past. In over 65 years of public service, they could find nothing. Think of that. Absolutely nothing. No negative comment against the boss or a king in the past. No dishonest deal in the past. No cutting down even the coworkers or other people. There was nothing they could find about him. So what did they do? Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless there is one spot in his life, one area that we can get in at him, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Unless we can find something that contradicts his law with his God and the law from the king. Daniel is extremely loyal and faithful to the king because he worships God. His excellent spirit is a character because he worships his God. Everything grows out of his life because he recognizes he is governed under God. And so he respects the authority in his life because he respects the ultimate authority over his life. But what if we can find a way that separates? And here's the thing. They didn't care about his worship. They didn't care how often he worshiped. They didn't care what he worshiped. They did not care anything about that. All they wanted to do was destroy his reputation, to bring him down. And the only way they found and knew that they could was to make a law that separated between the law of the kings of Medes and Persia from the law of God. But as we think Proverbs chapter 10, verse 9, it says, he who walks with integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will become known. He who walks with integrity walks securely. There is something about when you do life with integrity, not cutting corners, not doing things just because it'll please certain people, but you do it because it is right. When it becomes under investigation, it will stand securely. But when you wash to and fro to please this group or that group or whatever it might be, eventually it will be made known. And that is what we see here in Daniel's life. They knew that God was the center of his life, and everything else revolved around God. So what did they do in verse 6? So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree. And whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they come in, they flatter him. King, you're amazing. There is nobody like you. And you know what? All of us governors and satraps, we've all come together and just discussed about how awesome you are. And we want to make a law that your awesomeness will be known throughout the kingdom, and nobody can pray to any other God except you. That is how grand you are. Well, Darius, he doesn't even consider Daniel. I mean, they mention about all of them, and they appealed to his pride, found a weak link in Darius's heart. So what does he do in verse 9? Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. Now, why did they want it written? Well, back in that day, a king, his word was law. But the next day, he could change the law by changing his word. One day, he could say, this is law, and the next day, he could say, nope, we're not doing that. This is now law. But if it was written down, it could not be changed. And they didn't want him to backtrack and change the law. So they made sure he wrote it down and signed it. And what did Daniel do? Verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went and panicked. Is that what he did? Did he go and hide? Did he try to retaliate? One of the first things that our heart wants to do when somebody tries to tear us down is retaliate. Right? Have you ever felt that way? Anybody else want to retaliate? Or am I the only one that's kind of my first reaction? Maybe I'm the bad guy. I don't know. But there is something when you know that you are just doing right for right's sake, your heart is pure before God, and somebody else is trying to tear you down for doing right. It's like you want to just get back at them, right? But here's the thing. If we retaliate, we become just like the very people we don't like. And the reason why we become people, or we don't like them, is the actions that they do. And all of a sudden, when we retaliate, we begin doing the very actions that they do, which causes us to not like them. Does it make sense? And that's what happens to us. But the other thing is, if we retaliate, all of a sudden, they actually have real evidence that you've done wrong. And it takes an integrity and character to continue doing what is right, even in the midst of being criticized for doing what is right. But in the end, God does always reveal. What does Daniel do? In verse 10, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with the windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Now, there's several things that stand out in this passage. One, he did not go and begin praying and complaining to God. God, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you allowing them to do this against me? He doesn't go to God and begin lecturing God. God, if you can start doing these things, you can take care of them. He goes and he prays and he gives thanks. What did Daniel have to thank God for at this point? A lot. 65 years. And yeah, you could look back and say, you know what? He had so many bad things in life. And yet, he was able to give thanks. But the other thing that stands out, as it mentions, as was his custom since early days. This was not something that he just, on the spur of the moment, okay, there's a law now. You know what? I'm going to defy the law. He wasn't doing it in an act of rebellion. He was doing it just, this is something that I've always done. Why should I stop? Just because they've changed the laws. But the other thing is, they knew he would continue praying. That is the amazing thing in this story, is they knew it. Because they didn't care whether he prayed or not. All they cared about was finding fault with Daniel, getting him thrown in the den of lions. Daniel's out of the way. They're now promoted. They wanted promotion the easy way, just get the person out of the way that's ahead of you. But they knew that Daniel's life was so consistent that they knew Daniel would not stop. The people around us, do they see a consistency in us so strong of our commitment following God? They know, no matter what happens, no matter what is brought up, no matter the invitation that is entered into your life, no matter the command, no matter whatever, you will remain faithful. That's consistency. And it can be in many ways. When people look at our life, our commitment to God when it comes to the church, the local church body, how committed are we? Do people recognize that? Now, growing up, I'll be honest, I do not remember missing one church service. Through all of my days, it didn't matter if it was Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening. Even when we went on holiday, we'd find a church. Even in the midweek service on Wednesday evening, they would find a church. And you may look at that and say, that is extreme. Maybe it was. But if you were to talk to my parents, and all 8 of their children are faithfully and active in church, and half of them are either a pastor or married to a pastor, I think that faithfulness paid off. But the thing was, they did not do it for the pastor's sake. They did not do it for their appearance sake, because if it was, they wouldn't have done it on holiday. They did it because they were committed to God. They did it because it was real to them. And really, that's what conviction comes down to. Conviction is, how much do I believe in this, and how much am I willing to die or pay for it? Conviction really reveals how much we believe in something. And the sad thing is, when you go around the culture and the community and all around us, the sad thing is, there is a lot of people around this community that have more conviction about climate change than Christians do about God. Think about that for a moment. They have more conviction for a cause in this world or a political agenda or whatever it might be than what Christians do, having a conviction for God and willing to take a stand. After Daniel goes once again 3 times a day, just like he's always done, just another day of worshiping God. Verse 11, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplications before his God. They assembled, they gathered, they knew the time, the place, the who, the all, they knew it. It was so predictable. Daniel's life was so predictable. They knew right where to go, right when to find him, and of course, there he is. He's there praying to God. So what's their next step? And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Hey, king, do you remember that law that you signed a few days ago? That nobody is allowed to worship anybody else and pray to anybody else except you? Do you remember that, king? King answered and said that the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Yes, what you're saying is true. Verse 13, so they answered and said, you know that Daniel, I mean, we hate to tell you this, of course, king, but that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, he doesn't show due respect or due regard for you, O king. And it breaks our heart to see this, right? Or for the decree that you have signed. But he makes his petition 3 times a day. Verse 14, and the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself. He was displeased with himself that he even fell for their trap, for their trick, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. He tried everything he could. As the king, as the ruler, he tried everything he possibly could to spare Daniel from being thrown in the den of lions. But the law was written. Verse 15, then these men approached the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no king or no decree or statute which the king established may be changed. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Think about that statement from the king. The king tells Daniel, as he's about to be thrown into the lion's den, your God, whom you continually serve, that you have done all through your life, he will deliver you. The king has confidence that the God in which Daniel served had the ability to deliver him. You have on one side those that see Daniel's character, his consistency. They see the only way to get him is because he will remain faithful to God. And that was their way to tear him down. You see on the other side, it was his character and his faithfulness to God that revealed what he believes. There is something about it. Verse 17, then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. The king could not sleep. Now, this is really something to think about, and I've had to think about it myself. Now, if there was something within your workplace that caused your integrity to be tested, or something within whatever sphere of groups or gatherings that it might be, and say your boss had to fire you because of your integrity, would they lose sleep? Think about that. King Darius loses sleep because he had to fire or, kill Daniel. It bothered him so much. He loved and cared for Daniel so much because of his integrity. Verse 19, then the king arose and very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. as soon as he could, as fast as he could, he got to the lion's den. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God. Why did he call him servant of the living God? Because he recognized, you know what? You may work for me, but you serve somebody greater. Your reputation goes before you. Has your God, whom you serve continually, you have not stopped, been able to deliver you from the lions? Now here's the reality. When you look at those that are trying to hurt him, while some may hurt or harm you for what you believe, others are watching you to see how real what you believe is to you. Think about that. Though there may be some who are trying to take you down or tear you down or hurt you or harm you for what you believe, there is another group who is watching you to see what is revealed, how much you really believe it. And what we don't realize is our conviction and our belief in God and standing firm and following Him is a witness to those around us, even if they don't believe. And here's another element. People want to believe in something bigger than themselves. People do. People want to believe that there is something bigger than this world or something bigger around us. But so often they need to see believers living for something bigger than themselves. Because if believers aren't living for something bigger than themselves, why would anybody else want what we have? In verse 21, then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. He says, God sent an angel. I have been found innocent before God, but also, I've not wronged you. I had nothing against you, O king. I wasn't doing it to spite you. There was absolutely nothing. God protected him, but this wasn't the first time. God was with Daniel when he was a child. God was with Daniel when he faced the impossible. God was with Daniel's friends when they faced the furnace. God was with Daniel when he met with Belshazzar. And God was faithful to Daniel here at this time. Now, if you were to continue on in this story, Proverbs 26, verse 27 says, whoever digs a pit will fall into it. And if you read through this story, in verse 23, now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den, before they ever hit the bottom. I think this is just another symbol. You know, some people could give it and say, well, maybe there just weren't any lions in the lion's den. And that's how Daniel was protected. Maybe the lions just were not hungry, and that's why they didn't eat Daniel. Well, when these other were thrown in, as Daniel said, God spared me, which is proof of my innocence. As the others are thrown down, it was proof of their guilt But what began as an accusation ends in a testimony. What began as jealousy ends with God receiving the glory. Because verse 25, then King Darius wrote, to all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the region of Cyrus the Persian. When we read through this end, who's magnified? I know we've talked a lot about Daniel, but it's not Daniel that's magnified. It's the God in which Daniel served. But Daniel's faithfulness, standing through the test, his commitment revealed the greatness of God. Think about that. The world around us, how will they see the greatness of God? If the believers in God don't walk with conviction about the greatness of God. If we don't live our life as believers, recognizing we serve a great God, why would the world around us even care to believe what we believe if we don't fully believe it ourselves? Daniel's belief led to his conviction, and his conviction led to the world knowing about the greatness of God. So we have to ask ourselves, what am I known for? Am I known for my consistency following God? This was a test, but really the test began many, many, many years before. And most of the time, when we face a test, it's not a scheduled event. It's often more of a pop quiz. Will you stand the test of time? But when he purposed in his heart, before any crisis ever came, his conviction, he knew what he believed, he knew why he believed it. He was going to stand no matter what was brought before him, no matter what he was invited to, no matter what was commanded of him, no matter what was offered to him. His conviction was solid. He was going to stay faithful to God. And even at the end of his life, 65 years have passed, around 80 years old possibly, he was still going to remain faithful. But it was so predictable that he would be faithful. And that's the amazing thing.